Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. It's great to be here with you. Today I will be talking about the women who inspired the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which took place beginning in December of 1955. Historically, we've pretty much only associated Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King with the Montgomery bus boycotts. However, there were other people who contributed equally, and so I am here to enlighten you. The Montgomery bus boycott was one of the first successful peaceful protests against segregation in the Deep South. It occurred in Montgomery, Alabama, beginning in December of 1955, ending in December of 1956. The Montgomery bus boycott was significant because it established Martin Luther King Jr. as a civil rights leader. Before that, he was a minister at the Dexter Street Baptist Church, which is also located in Montgomery, Alabama. It also was significant because it introduced Rosa Parks to the world. What we've been taught over the years, of course, is that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white passenger. In the days of segregation, it was illegal for blacks to sit at the front of the bus. Blacks had to sit at the back of the bus in the colored section. At that time, it was politically correct to call black people colored. So blacks had to sit in the colored section of the bus. If a white person boarded the bus and there were no seats available in the white section, blacks were expected to give up their seats for white bus patrons. Martin Luther King was more of the voice of the Montgomery bus boycotts, the spokesperson, the person who was out front, as well as Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks' story is that on December 5th of 1955, she was going home from work and she was sitting on the bus, and a white person boarded the bus and wanted her to get up so they could sit down, and she refused, and the bus driver called the police and had her arrested. What people don't know about Rosa Parks is that at that time, Rosa Parks was 44 years old. She had been politically active for over 20 years already at that time. She was involved in the NAACP. Rosa Parks was a rebel. Rosa Parks had been kicked off buses before, and by the very bus driver that called the police on her that day. People believe that Rosa Parks was this meek, quiet woman, but Rosa Parks was a force to be reckoned with. The reason why we believe that Rosa Parks was meek and quiet and soft-spoken is because that is the way that civil rights leaders wanted her image to be projected to the world. If people knew her level of activity in the civil rights movement as it was, they would not have been sympathetic to the cause. The narrative of her life was that she's this seamstress, she's a Christian, she's a family woman who simply was too tired that day to give up her seat on the bus. And hence, she was thrust into all of this legal trouble. What Rosa Parks did was heroic because she did not know what the consequences of her actions would really be. She had no idea that her actions would lead to the desegregation of buses. One thing to know is that Rosa Parks' experience on the buses was not something new. Many Blacks had been kicked off buses, had been arrested, beaten, thrown in jail because they broke segregation laws on the buses. It happened almost daily. Joanne Robinson once surmised that 3 out of 5 Black people in Montgomery, Alabama, had experienced similar incidents riding the city buses. And they were getting tired of this. Black people were getting tired of having to give up their seats for whites. I mean, a lot of them would do it and not complain and just, just go along with it. But deep down, it's hurtful. It was hurtful. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating. It made people angry. And many of these bus drivers would target women. Now, of course, men had their fair share, but a lot of times we see that it was women who were really suffering the abuse from these bus drivers. The most active Black professional women's civic group at that time was the WPC, which was the Women's Professional Council. It was begun by Mary Fair Burks because other professional women's groups in Montgomery were not integrated. They were segregated and would not allow Blacks. So she started her own. And later, Joanne Robinson joined the WPC. Mrs. Joanne Robinson was a professor at Alabama State College. In March of 1954, which was over a year before Rosa Parks stepped on that bus, that fateful day, Mrs. Joanne Robinson had drafted a letter on behalf of the WPC asking Mayor Tackey to improve conditions on the buses. And if he did not, there would be a boycott. Now the letter was nicely written. She was very nice in her approach. And of course, the letter did not change anything. As a matter of fact, people had been complaining about the buses and nothing was ever done about it. So the bus boycott had been being planned for months. But it was the WPC who first presented the idea of a bus boycott and repeatedly complained to the Montgomery City leaders about the unfair seating practices and abusive drivers on the bus. It was also the WPC who drew up tens of thousands of flyers in order to get the word out to the patrons not to ride the buses. Some of the incidents that happened in Montgomery, Alabama on these buses include 10 years prior to Rosa Parks, a woman by the name of Geneva Johnson was arrested for not having the correct change and talking back to the driver. Now, Miss Johnson simply paid her fine and continued to ride the buses after that. Over the next few years, there were more arrests. Viola White and Katie Wingfield were arrested in 1944. 2 children, the ages of 10 and 12, were arrested for not giving up their seats. In 1952, a black man was shot and killed by the police as he walked off the bus after disputing a 10-cent fare. It was ruled a justifiable homicide because the man had resisted arrest. In 1953, a woman by the name of Epsie Worthy actually fought a bus driver because he refused to accept her bus transfer and demanded that she pay. And she refused to pay, stepped off the bus. He followed her off the bus and a fight ensued. So she ended up getting arrested and being fined $52. So it was a lot of different events that happened in Montgomery that led to the boycott. It was Viola White's arrest that was very significant to this movement because it was through her arrest that the leaders were able to kind of see how they had to maneuver the legal system in order to effect change. White was arrested for not giving up her seat. Civil rights leader E.D. Nixon went down to bail her out of jail. He also assisted her with appealing her charges. He submitted several appeals to the circuit court, which was a court on the state level. Mobile, Alabama knew that they would not win the appeal. So what they did was they made it so that the appeal never got on the court's calendar. So they did that for years. They drug it out for years. What this taught civil rights leaders like E.D. Nixon was that the only way anything was truly going to get done is if they file their appeals at the federal level instead of the state level. For example, they knew that Rosa Parks' case, which was first tried in the Court of Common Appeal, would never even make it up to the circuit court level. And if it did make it to the circuit court level, it would probably sit there for years and years before it was ever heard. By the time it got to federal court, it would likely be dismissed because it had already been heard by a lower court. Now, the case that ultimately ended segregation on the buses was the case of Browder versus Gayle. Now, this is where the laws actually changed. The Montgomery Bus Boycott brought national attention to what was going on in Montgomery. However, the changing of laws did not take place until the court case of Browder versus Gayle was decided. Now, you may have heard of Brown versus the Board of Education, which was a case that had been decided maybe a year earlier in 1954, where the schools ended up being desegregated. So here we are, fast forward to 1955, and we're talking about trying to desegregate the buses. So the plaintiffs in the case were Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, Claudette Colvin, and Mary Louise Smith. There was also a fifth plaintiff. She decided to drop out of the case because she had been intimidated by whites. Fred Gray was the filing attorney on the case. He was advised by Thurgood Marshall. Notice Rosa Parks is not included in the list of plaintiffs. That is because Rosa Parks had other charges that had been brought against her that they were fighting, and they wanted this case to be strictly about segregation, strictly about the unconstitutionality of segregation. And if And had Rosa Parks been included, it would have gotten more complicated. Some background on the plaintiffs of the Browder versus Gayle case. So first you have Aurelia Browder, who on April 9th, 1955, was arrested for sitting in the white section of the bus. Browder was a widowed single mother. She had completed high school in her 30s. She later got her bachelor's degree from the University of Alabama. It was Joanne Robinson who encouraged Browder to join the lawsuit. Next is Claudette Colvin, who has been written about and is making a name for herself. Was 15 at the time of her arrest. And she was arrested on March 2nd, 1955, 9 months prior to Rosa Parks. And she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white person. Now, Colvin was a feisty young teen. And when they were arresting her, she was screaming at them. She was not going down without a fight. And she was yelling at them that it was her constitutional right to sit on that bus. People have asked Miss Colvin why she did not get up. Quoting her, "History kept me stuck in my seat. I felt the hand of Harriet Tubman pushing me down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth pushing me down on the other." Next was Susie McDonald, who was 70 years old, walked with a cane, and she was very, very light-skinned, and she could pass for white. However, she would let people know that she was indeed black. She was arrested for violating segregation rules on the bus. So she also joined this lawsuit, and she was arrested on October 21st, 1955, which is before Rosa Parks. And also on October 21st, 1955, Mary Louise Smith was arrested for not giving up her seat, also prior to Rosa Parks. Now, why was Rosa Parks' experience the one that sparked the boycott? Why did the boycott start the day after Rosa Parks was arrested? Why didn't it start after Claudette Colvin? Remember, Claudette Colvin was the first person to be arrested in 1955. She was first. 15-year-old Claudette Colvin. The reason that Claudette Colvin's arrest was not the right time to start the boycott and put her forward as kind of the face of the boycott was because, number one, Claudette Colvin was young. Number two, she was emotional. She had gotten very emotional when she had to go to trial for the charges that had been brought against her. And so she got really emotional, and the civil rights leaders saw this. She also was unmarried and became pregnant in that same year. There were things said about Claudette Colvin amongst the community that she lived. And people the civil rights leaders just felt like there was too much that could be used against her in the media, in the white media. Too many things that they can take and try and slander her with. So they passed up on Claudette Colvin. With the other ladies, they also had skeletons in their closet for lack of a better word, but there were things about each lady that made them not good candidates to be that martyr and come forward as the face of the movement. However, Rosa Parks more so fit the bill. One thing is, of course, Rosa Parks is fair-skinned. She's got good hair. She's soft-spoken. She's a seamstress. She's a Christian. It's not a whole lot that can be used against Rosa Parks in the media, in the white media. Like it or not, Rosa Parks was the person who they chose. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court. We know that the Browder group did come out victors in this case, and as a result, the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, and across the nation were now integrated. And the bus boycott was called off. People started back riding the buses. So there were many names who contributed to the desegregation of buses, and the names that we know and the names that we've said and we've learned about all these years are extremely important and extremely relevant. However, there's more to the story. Thank you for watching. Hit the like, hit the thumb up, and subscribe. Ring the bell if you would like further notifications. And hope to see you next time.